Good morning, magandang araw, Zhao Shanghao. I am Ariel Nikaoyao. I will be discussing you about the Chinese English or the China English. So let's start. China English is another variety of English. China English is a family member of English. So I will discuss if Chinese are in an American English speakers or British English speakers. So today we will go deeper about how the how China English works. In addition, do you know that China English has its own distinctive features on the level of phonology, text and discourse, sentences and vocabulary? So we will gonna tackle about each one of them on my video. China is a variety. Yes, China English is a variety because every English has a different variety in each place. For example, we have this Philippinism. We have this. As a Filipina, we have our own variety of English on how we speak, on how we pronounce, on how we use English words in a sentence. So that is an example of English variety. Every region and every place or every huge community, there are different varieties of English. So let's start. China English as a standard variety because in the in the three circles, there are the inner, the outer, and the expanding circle. The China is belong on the outer circle, in which they were colonized. They was colonized by the British or the American people, in which when they speak, sometimes they sound like British or else American English. China has also their own phonology. So we all know what is phonology. Phonology is the study of sounds. So as the Chinese, they also have their own sounds, like their own variety of pronunciation. They have their own way on speaking, on how they pronounce, on how they compile every words that they want. So a future English teacher, we must, as what you've always said, Sir Von, we should always be open-minded. We should not laugh on how they speak. We should not laugh on how they pronounce, because as I've said, Chinese has their own variety of English. So that explains why Chinese has its own phonology, because Chinese we can say that they don't really fluent in English. They don't really know how to speak strictly, but as long as they know how to speak, or they know how to make a sentence on how they speak, we should consider it as they know how to speak in English. They just don't know how to pronounce it well, same as the native speakers. But as I've said, Chinese has their own variety of English. So let's proceed to the Chinese distinctive features on the level of vocabulary. We all know that vocabulary is a type of words in which there has a meaning on it, same as ours. So in China, they have this own vocabulary. We all know that language and vocabulary is very common to each other, because without vocabulary, there's no language. So without words, you can't without words and vocabulary, you can't have this. You can't speak without meaning on it, and Chinese people have their own vocabulary in which it's only them that can understand on what they're going to say or what they're going to speak. Even in English language, in English vocabulary, there are a lot of words. For example, the silk. It has a 65 different features of silk. So that explains why Chinese has its own vocabulary, because even English, even the vocabulary of English has its own vocabulary, and there are a lot of words on it. So that explains why Chinese must also have their own, because it will connect on their what do you call this? It can connect in their L1. It can connect in their first language, in which they are the only ones who can understand. So Chinese also have their own distinctive features on the level of sentences. As I've said, and they have their own varieties of English, phonology, and vocabulary. So without vocabulary, how can you make a sentence? You get my point? How can you make how can you say, and how can you speak? How can you communicate without words? So that explains why Chinese has its own vocabulary, in which they also have its own sentence. They will connect it. The words they will connect, and that is how they communicate, I think. So that explains why Chinese has its own sentence. So let's go to text and discourse. Chinese has also have their own text and discourse. So I'm not so familiarized in the letters of the Chinese, but I am looking forward to know it. So we all know that we have different letters, like, so as you've said, Sir Von, Chinese have symbols in which we don't have. We only have 26 letters, 27 included the Enya, but the Chinese, in their letters, they have their symbols in which that is the one can call, and we can call them unique because they have their own symbols. As you've said, sir, that for example, the house you've made, the last meeting, I think that is their way to again communicate, their way to interact with each other. So that is why they have their own text and discourse, because they have symbols, and for me it is very hard to adapt, in which same as them, they also make they also have a difficult time in adapting English, same as we, same as us, same as us. We found Chinese words, symbols difficult one. So all in all, Chinese has its own variety. Chinese has its own vocabulary. Chinese has its own phonology, how they pronounce. All in all, they are a variety of English. As I've said, a family member of English, in which they can only pronounce their own way, same as their L1. So that's it for today. Thank you and God bless.